Hello everyone and welcome. What is the real economic situation of Barça? The question seems very simple because for the vast majority of clubs it is enough to simply read the financial statements published each year to have an idea more or less of the situation. Except with Barça, between announcements, opacity and the complexity of certain arrangements, the answer is not necessarily obvious. And the question is all the more important today because there are a lot of debates and truths and also falsehoods related to the absence of registration of Dani Olmo, the standout signing of the transfer market, more than 50 potatoes, and who therefore could not be registered for his first 2 match days of League One. And so we return to the eternal debate, does Barça have the money? If so, and yet, remember, less than a year ago, well, we thought it was more or less good. Since the club announced with much fanfare, it was reported worldwide, record profit in 2022, 2023, Barça made more than 300 million in profits. We were all there congratulating ourselves. Laporta himself spoke about it, constantly showing his ambitions. This I had talked to you about. From the beginning, we wanted to make people dream by being somewhat misleading, aiming for the figures to say what we want them to say. Why did Barça post 300 million in profits? You'll tell me, but it's incredible. No football club has that, not even Real. By the way, it was very funny because they announced 300 million and some in profits, and the following year they say, well, we hope for 11 million. You say to yourself, but how can you go from 300 to 11? Quite simply because there was what we call an exceptional result. How do you reach 300 million? And there you will see what I will say. It's a legal method that was described confidentially, but honestly, it's hilarious. I say to myself, but these guys are too good to pass this off like a cream horse. It's magnificent. That is to say, you know the famous Laporta levers? That is to say, we are going to use these levers so that financially things get better, to register the players, etc. Remember at the beginning with his very ambitious transfer policy, when he brought in Rafinha, Koundé, Lewandowski, and all. So there's obviously the sale of part of the TV rights of the club. We remind everyone who doesn't know the football economy that the main source of income is the TV rights, all right, from everywhere. So they initially sold 10% of their TV rights to a fund called Sixth Street in exchange for cash. It's a bit like what CBC did with League One, except here it's not for life. And in fact, they were sold an additional 15%. So that means Sixth Street, over the next 25 years, will receive 25% of Barca's television rights. And in exchange, there were checks of several hundred million. So it's quick cash that was necessary, especially to repay certain debts in the short term, etc. And also renegotiate certain debts. In this case, it wasn't too bad for Barça. We'll get back to that later. So they needed quick cash to have liquidity. And in exchange, over the next 25 years, Barça is cut by 25% of its income, since 25% of its TV rights will go to that fund. Well, you understand me. So necessarily, in your financial statement, well, you just did that. It's called an exceptional result. That is to say that the few hundred million, because the 15%, we did not have the actual amount announced. Unfortunately, we doesn't know. We can only guess that it's several hundreds of millions. Well, it's in your balance sheet. So you add the amount, but the following year, you won't have it. On the contrary, you will have 25% less on TV rights. So we understand, but they did more than that. One of the other levers was the sale of this famous Barça Studio. I don't know what they call it today. I think it's Barça Vision. And so it was officially sold. They had sold 49% of Barça Studio to a fund for about 200 million, right? And so it was 49%. And so they said, well, wait, if 49% is worth 200 million, then the 51% that remains is worth 208. And so they recorded it in the balance sheet as an asset. Understand the thing, that is, I sell 49% of Barça Studio. It includes lots of things, etc. on digital, whatever you want, okay. I sell it for 200 million. I keep 51%. I might resell, etc. and all that. So I value it, obviously, since 49% is 200 million, 51% is 208, but I didn't actually get those 208 million. It's just that we say, there, the asset is worth that much. They put that in the balance sheet. And so, in fact, that adds up. So what I'm saying is perfectly legal. There are people who will explain it much better than I do. But actually, I want people to understand. That is, they put it in the profit thing. Something that is not an income, something that is an asset valuation. It's completely different at this level. So once again, sometimes the finance experts, they will forgive me, I am patient, but it's to help people understand. And that's why you end up with 300 million in profits, because actually you have valued something through a sale. So this is an exceptional case. Furthermore, you have sold part of your VAT rights for immediate cash. And so, to be realistic, if you didn't have that, you are actually in a significant deficit of at least 100 million. So, in fact, it's an illusion. Some will call it creative accounting. And the worst is yet to come. Well, c'est top episode. That is that famous 49% sold of Barça Studio. The guys didn't pay. They only paid 65 million out of 200, which means Barça is in an impossible mess. Because first of all, we said it years ago, it was valued way too high. The fund was still a bit border. Honestly, it was an absolute mess. So it's true, they inherited a complicated situation. But the problem is, we got elected by making people dream. But no, we'll get this and that back. That's why you say later, you spend 40 million on Victor. Okay, even though you're struggling financially. But it's fine. You have to make people dream. Make them dream. Then we'll bring Spaniards back too, because that makes people dream, etc. The training, all that. Anyway, you know the speech and the propaganda. While in reality, you need to implement austerity measures. And there, you've overvalued too much. And now you find yourself with 135 million you don't have. So inevitably, you're up against it, especially with the commitments you made with La Liga. Same thing, remember a few months ago? Yes, leaking an exceptional contract with Nike. Still, the contract with Nike hasn't happened. The problem is that you had announced this to La Liga. You had announced the sale of the studios, but in the end, you didn't get the cash. And the contract with Nike was supposed to be, I don't know, gargantuan. While on the other side, yeah, we'll say, oh, but it's an amateur management. But not only that, because there are still some good things. The payroll has finally decreased. Remember the madness after Neymar. And the salaries, exponential. Well, that was given by the former management and all, so we finally managed to have a wage bill that is much more acceptable. It has decreased by about 30%, if I'm not mistaken. That's very good. Meanwhile, indeed, the income, commercial revenue has increased. The same goes for ticketing. The same goes for all the facilities. We also have the women's section that is not losing money, which is very good when you see how much basketball loses. So there are also some positive points. The problem is that these positive points do not compensate for everything necessary because we are going further. La Liga has not played a big role because, in fact, the commitments made by Barça, the promises made by the Barça, they haven't been honored, quite simply. And the people who just want to see Daniel Mao or see the players, well, they're actually caught up in all this. And the problem is there's so much communication spin, it's super opaque. So we don't really know who to rely on. I also remind that until 2028, Barça must repay more than 200 million to the banks. There was also a renegotiation, a rescheduling of the debt with Goldman Sachs, which was colossal. Goldman Sachs lent, I believe, about 500 million or something like that. But now the interest rates have dropped, so that's good. They were able to renegotiate at preferential rates. So they have, I believe, a saving of about 50 million. And so they have about 444 million remaining to be repaid until the year 2031. Except that actually in 2031, they have to clear 230 million. So one can imagine that by then, there will be another debt rescheduling, etc. and all. And that's not counting the famous grand-scale Espai Barça project that was announced with great fanfare, involving 20 financial actors for a cost of 1.4 billion. So the interest rates that were announced, well, surprise, they are actually a bit higher than expected, by the way. And so the question, in fact, is simple. Barça is in a very complicated situation. You still want to do Espai Barça, saying, okay, it will provide new structures, renovations, whatever you want. It will then allow us to make a lot more money and be financially stable. I understand. The problem is that the club cannot support Espai Barça with everything it involves, even if you have loans that will be repaid within 24 years, right? But you can't suddenly do that. On the other hand, not being in a huge austerity policy. I'm sorry, that doesn't make people, players, etc. dream. And it's not for electoral reason. But if Barça wants to survive and be healthy in the long term, there will need to be massive austerity. That means not increasing the salaries of the executives who, oh well, how strange, it goes from 17 to 24 million, oh well, but we achieved record profits. So as some said, Barça yes, Laporta no. You can understand because when you read the numbers, you think there is a small issue. Well, efforts have been made, which is very good. But on one side, you spend 40 million on Vitor Roque. Given the club's situation, you can't keep having an extravagant policy, as we see with this transfer window. And honestly, Daniel Mo, it's... So yes, there are those who will talk to me about sports, but here, more than sports, you have to think financially. How can you suddenly support such investments, even if you don't pay them immediately, with everything else? Everything you have to repay, the transfers, because you have not finished repaying everything yet. Also, all your bank loans until 2028, so it's really short term. It's 200 million, plus then Goldman Sachs, plus managing this sparse country on the side. How are you going to do it actually? How are you going to manage 1 billion, 400 and 200? Mr. How? What are you doing? So yes, you can deceive people, you do accounting tricks. Oh yes, but we value this at 200 million. So I value it at 208 million, I put it, etc. But I can't find the money. You can announce Nike, you can announce whatever you want. At some point, you're going to need cash, except that you have liquidated quite a few assets. So yes, you have Spotify, you have the naming, and it's true that there is some good work being done as well. It cannot be denied, and the situation is very complicated. But today, if you don't sell your best assets in the coming years, how are you going to find the cash? Are you going to take out more loans that will... signing, at some point, it's really not sustainable. And all of this also depends on the sports results. That's why last year's elimination in the Champions League hurt Barca a lot. Because that if they had qualified against Paris Saint-Germain, it would have been 10, 15 million more. With the TV rights, the rights UEFA gives, etc. So in fact, the club is really caught between two chairs. Because on one hand, sports-wise, he cannot weaken the team too much, because if he does, he risks earning less from sports awards, as the further you go in the Champions League, the more bonuses you have. At the same time, the more stars people have, the more they will buy jerseys, etc. But it's not huge, it's always a bonus, and every penny counts at Barca right now. And on the other hand, you cannot spend too much either, because if you do, as was done with Rafinha and Lewandowski, etc., you're caught in a bind because you have to pay back other things. So you have to manage that. And the third equation, which is, let's see, which is the power. That is to say, I also cannot tell people the truth. Because on one hand, they will tell you yes, but then we wouldn't be strong in terms of negotiations, in terms of dealing with the players. Yes, knowing that today, if you have an offer, everyone is very clearly on the market. Obviously, Yamal and Kumasi are not yet 18 years old, so they cannot be sold. They especially do not want to sell them because it is a matter of image. But at some point, the question will arise. Because yes, you risk losing more big salaries next year. An effort has been made on this, and that's very good and worth noting. Except that it will not be enough. So at some point, something big will need to be done. Except you cannot continue indefinitely selling a percentage of TV rights. I remind you that for 25 years, Barça will receive 25% less in TV rights since they sold them to Sixteripa, given the situation. So I don't know if you understand the complexity of the project, and it's simply about asking whether it's a club that has bitten off more than it can chew. Belly, finally bigger than the belly. Are these pharaonic projects Espai Barça, and at the same time maintaining a competitive team? Can you do all that simultaneously? If you manage to finish champion and go far in the Champions League, I'm telling you that you will receive additional revenue, and potentially by betting and unperforming a miracle by saying, can a Kumasi and Yamal come from the cantera? Because literally that's it. Today, Barça no longer has the means for its ambitions, and the real problem isn't even that. It's that people are being misled with communication effects, making them believe something, especially for electoral purposes, to maintain this idea of prestige, etc. We need to simply tell people something. Barça was exceptional. It was a winning machine 10, 15 years ago. Today, financially, the club can't anymore. And without a true austerity plan, every year we'll be asking the question, will this player or not be? Is it recorded? So it's still a bit sad, even more than sad. But we obviously wish the very best to the Blaugrana. Anyway, I hope it allows people to see things a bit more clearly. I reassure them though, Barça is not in a situation like Bordeaux, that we may make a new video soon. Because right now, I see exceptional things in France. A budget of 1 million in salary mass, former guys who were in League 2 last year. When you see the salaries, you think, okay, everything is fine. But again, the DNCG told us, yes, there is no problem. So in France, even realize that in France, we managed to control less well than in Spain. It's quite frightening when you see the situation. 10, 15 years ago, it was the opposite. But we will have time to come back to that very soon. Have a good day, 5 team.